All right, guys, welcome back to the Pocket Mats channel. It's Matty here, and welcome back to Meta Monday, the weekly series where we analyze the Pokemon Pocket metagame and keep you guys up to date on everything going on in the competitive world of Pokemon Pocket. This past weekend was PMPT number 26. Over 600 players came out to compete in the second tournament of this new Mega Shine season. I say new, but really, we're a couple of weeks into it right now, and I think you're going to see by the results of this past weekend's tournament that things have really settled in. I think the progression here is interesting, but definitely not out of left field. We'll talk about it all. We'll break down the results, the final standings, the deck lists, and then we'll get into the metagame data and kind of review everything that's going on below the surface level, just like we normally do. But before we do that, you got to go register for this weekend's tournament, PMPT number 27. That's right, we're still at it. This one is called Hyper Shine, $100 US dollar prize pool. It is April 11th at noontime, and it's going to be the last tournament before the next invitational tournament. So we're going to have some more news about that invitational tournament. Basically, we keep track of every player who plays in our tournaments, records, and they accumulate points. And basically, the top X amount of players will be invited to a special tournament at the end of the season. So in place of PMPT number 28, there will be the invitational. So a week from this weekend is when that invitational will take place. There'll be more information coming out soon, but just know the last tournament of the season will be the invitational tournament, and then I guess the next season, or the third season, will start up once B3 comes out, because we only have like 2 weeks, or two, I guess, yeah, like 2.5 weeks until B3 comes out, the next full set, which is crazy. But anyway, don't forget to like and subscribe, and let's get right into it. Here are the final standings of the tournament this past weekend. Again, 600 players. Shout out to all of the people that make this tournament happen and play, everybody that plays in the tournament. Super cool. Anyway, there we go. Here are the standings. So one thing you'll notice here is a lot of Hydreigon. So Imp Brendan here from France does get first place. An incredible record. Absolutely incredible record of 14-1. That's definitely one of the best records we've seen in a very long time at the PMPT tournament series. And he was playing Hydreigon. And I think that this week and this weekend was definitely a very dominant performance for Hydreigon, but I think that that's sort of the trend that the season's going. If you guys remember our tier list on Tuesday last week, we put Hydreigon S tier. I think very clearly it is still one of the strongest decks in the entire game, but there's definitely kind of a progression. I think if you take a look at what was going on early this season, you'll notice two main things. The number one thing was that Oricorio, especially like with Manectric and Magnezone, was obviously like very, very common this early season. Those lightning type decks had been kind of taking over. And one thing is for sure is that Hydreigon definitely loves to beat those lightning type decks. And even though last week we did see Manectric beat Hydreigon in the grand finals, it was definitely understood that Hydreigon would be pretty well positioned into those matchups. And of course, a lot of people still playing the lightning type decks early this season, which I think really opened things up for Hydreigon. But also, you got to keep in mind that a lot of the new decks that people are playing are Mega Pokemon decks. Hydreigon's very unique because it does a ton of damage, it's got great pacing, but it's a bunch of single prize Pokemon. So, for other Mega type Pokemon or Mega Evolution Pokemon, they don't love to go up against Hydreigon typically, because Hydreigon can just attack, and then you have to deal with Absol. And basically, it's just too many Pokemon to have to go through for a single Mega Pokemon. Hydreigon specifically does pretty well into those types of decks. I think Hydreigon was definitely well positioned, and really no surprise that it got first place, but definitely a little bit of surprise how many Hydreigon were here in top 8. We had 1, 2, 3, 4, so half of top 8 was Hydreigon. And if you go down, there was a bunch more as well. Now, Mames, 1, 2, 3 from the United States got grand finals. And he was playing Altaria and Igglybuff. This is the Bad Dreams, the Sleep Scam Altaria deck, which, I didn't actually put a lot of Altaria in, I didn't really talk about it late last week. It just felt like Altaria really wasn't doing that well. And quite frankly, I think if you take a look at the standings here, Altaria, especially like the Sleep version, really didn't do very well. The next highest placing Altaria deck was 36th place, and the average win rates for this deck have been pretty low. So a lot of people did play it. Definitely still a common deck, but has been underperforming over and over again the last week or so. This is a deck that I think really isn't that well positioned into the metagame. Also pretty easily countered by all of the status condition curing cards and effects like Ogre Paw and PCL, things like that. So definitely surprised to see Altaria make it into second place. But if you go down, there is some Altaria higher up in these standings. They're just Altaria and Greninja. So it does feel to me that the sleep Altaria stuff, maybe not that strong of a choice moving forward. However, Altaria Greninja was one of the more successful decks this weekend. So I think that moving forward, I think Altaria is sort of finding a place just with Greninja, just like we saw. And we're kind of seeing a reversion. Like it's a weird progression here into the second week, now going into the third week of this Mega Shine season. But, I think realistically, a lot of these new cards come out, the metagame really flips upside down, and then it kind of goes a little bit too far, and some of the old classic decks kind of start to reemerge as really strong options, and I think that's what we're seeing right now, and things kind of have to like counterbalance and then even out as we get into this third week. That's why Hydreigon doing so well, Altaria Greninja doing so well, and I think Suicune also a pretty strong choice right now. So, yeah, I mean, Mames123, congrats to him, made it to Grand Finals, lost to Hydreigon. This is a deck that, to be fair, there might not have been that much sleep counterplay this weekend. I know none of these Altaria decks really did incredibly well. The highest Altaria Igglybuff deck other than Mames was 36th place, which is kind of drastic. Yeah, I think this was a surprise to me. I mean, I know this is a deck that's strong and can win. It just hasn't really been doing that well recently. Yeah, Hydreigon incredibly dominant, to be honest. In third place, though, Kanado Mochiduki. The names are so tough for me, and I really apologize. From Japan, third place, great run, Giratina Darkrai. So we talked about, I think Giratina Darkrai is just another kind of old deck that people started to play again that is strong. So it's interesting. Like I said, we kind of come so far that things are kind of, looping back around, and I think Giratina Darkrai, just a really strong deck at the moment. This player here, I want to check, did lose to Hydreigon, but played several Hydreigon throughout the tournament, had a pretty decent record. Got a win here, a loss here, a win, and then a loss, right? So definitely Giratina Darkrai seems to me like a deck that can kind of compete against anything. And I think it probably deserves to see more play. We talked about it on Friday. Definitely kind of a resurgence of Giratina Darkrai, and I just think that it's a very solid option right now. And Kana here brought it all the way to top 4, so congrats to him. And then again, fourth place Gosu from the United States, more Hydreigon. Below him is SG Hydra from Spain, Altaria Greninja. And again, if we go down, Altaria Greninja got not only 5th place, but it got 10th place, got 12th place, and then, down here, 26th place. So as far as Altaria decks go, it does seem like high roll, Greninja Altaria kind of is still the dominant option right now. That could change, in an interesting way. I don't know how many people are playing Chingling Altaria, but I think the absence of Chingling in this metagame is also one of those factors that's really opening things up for Hydreigon in a way that I think everybody kind of realizes and understands. That interaction has been very common, very understood for months now in Pokemon Pocket. Hydreigon typically loses to Altaria in Chingling, but not a lot of Altaria players playing the traditional Chingling package, so we might need to just see, like some of those classics come back. Oh my gosh, excuse me, almost died there. I'm a little bit sick, so I got some problems going on. Anyway, so I think like Hydreigon just ends up being pretty well positioned against a lot of these newer decks, and Altaria and Chingling kind of probably needs to come back, and then we're going to find ourselves, back to the sort of the classic metagame of Hydreigon, Suicune, and Altaria Chingling, because it really kind of comes back to those types of things. It's unfortunate, there's just not that many counter decks to Hydreigon in the metagame, so whenever Hydreigon finds itself to be well positioned, it's just a bit of a struggle, because, you're kind of limited to options of which decks you should be playing to be able to beat Hydreigon. So I think maybe Chingling Altaria deserves to kind of see a little bit more play in the future here. Mouse L96 from the Netherlands, also Hydreigon. So Hydreigon getting 6th place. We did have Frederick playing Suicune Excalibur. And we did also have Arian from Belgium also playing Suicune Excalibur, but not a super dominant performance. Only 2 Suicune decks here in top 16, although Puro Nito was in 17th place. So, definitely a decent performance for Suicune. I think that Suicune's still a top tier deck. It's still super strong. It's just, there's so many things in the game that are strong. When there's a ton of, Altaria and Hydreigon and all of this other new stuff people are playing, Suicune just kind of gets lost in the mix a little bit. It's a really good deck, but definitely not like incredibly strong. Hydreigon, definitely the biggest story, at least at the top of the standings. We did have a Dark Greninja in 9th place. That's Mono Outlaw from Germany. I think Dark Greninja is a massive sleeper deck. I don't know how many people played it, but I think it deserves to see more play. And then we have Takahiro from France here, 13th place. So Steelix kind of finding its way into top 16, as well as Imp Frozen playing the dual Charizard deck. So there was some representation. Manectric, Zeraora, Lenora, actually, Indonesia, 16th place. So if you take a look at top 16, very dominated by Hydreigon, but Lots of different decks. I mean, if you really were to break it all down, I know people definitely weight, decks that win tournaments more than decks that get, 12th place at a tournament or whatever. But realistically, you have to look at the representation across all of day 2 in Top Cut. And I think Hydreigon might have been the most played deck this tournament. We'll have to, review that. We'll get into it and take a look at the data a little bit later. But we had Hydreigon, Altaria, and Igglybuff, Giratina Darkrai, Altaria, and Greninja. We had Suicune Excalibur, we had Dark Greninja, we had Steelix, we had Charizard, and we had Manectric. That's a lot of different decks, and I think all of those are really, really strong. But again, I wouldn't spend, and I always say this, but don't spend too much time or energy really reviewing the decks at the very top of the standings. There's some information to gather here. Of course, if we take a look at this, anybody would tell you that Hydreigon was a strong choice and definitely a top tier deck right now. But I think we all knew that going into this weekend anyway. But I wouldn't take a look at Altaria and Igglybuff getting to grand finals and thinking it's like the second best deck right now. I really don't think that's the case. But Hydreigon is what's dominating, and we're definitely going to have to counter adjust to that. Mega Altaria Greninja typically plays Chingling, so that might be actually a pretty decent option kind of getting into this Hydreigon, dominated metagame. But, we'll see moving forward for sure. If we go down a little bit, we had Froggy X Atomics playing Venusaur actually, kind of popping up here this past week. Venusaur ends up being a pretty decent deck. I just think that, other than against like Hydreigon stuff, which can pop off early, and Hydreigon really is the exception to the fact that this metagame is a little bit slower. I think faster paced decks have had a pretty big advantage. Manectric, we saw that early on in that first week. But Hydreigon kind of course, the pop off, fast paced deck that everybody sort of associates Pokemon Pocket with right now, the turn 2 130s. Sometimes that just kind of wins you games, and there's really not much else in the game that can do that. A lot of these other decks are kind of more mid game focused, so that's also very interesting. But Charizard, Manectric, Steelix, these are things that probably don't want to have to go through double Hydreigon. Like, it's just the way that a lot of these decks are built. It's just kind of tough to make that happen, of course. And Hydreigon is playing Poison Barb Nihilego, and we'll get into the deck list in a little bit, but maybe a pretty big factor why some of the sleep decks aren't that strong into Hydreigon Mega Absol. It's Hydreigon is such a strong card. It really is. The only way you counter Hydreigon is by stopping it from being able to come out with things like Chingling, and that's why this card feels very oppressive. It's just so good on so many levels. But yeah, so Venusaur here, 21st place, love to see it. Couple of Scizors down here. Again, Scizor is not a weak deck by any stretch. A very strong deck, just sort of lost in the mix. It's almost like, it's hard to find footing for Steelix because, is it that good into that many things? Like, what is it really doing other than just being a pretty solid deck? If we go down even more, Everhard was playing Mega Manectric and Silvally, which is pretty cool. That's a cool deck we'll take a look at. We did see Blaziken Greninja here, Froggy X Arca, 39th place. We had Aulia, 42nd place, playing Chandelure, Meloetta, which is pretty cool. Another Blaziken down here, Mimikyu in 56th place. That's Numa Tenale. Shout out to Numa. We had the Gyarados, Suicune, and Harry in 59th place. So, definitely a lot of variety in day 2. It's just not a lot of them made it super far because I think they had to deal with a lot of Hydreigon. But anyway, let's break down the deck lists and see if there's anything that really stands out to us, because I think a lot of this stuff is not going to be that surprising. But this is going to be Brendan's deck, and this is the Hydreigon deck of this new season, right? The Hiking Trail, still playing Lucky Ice Pops here because they are legal, and I think that, again, like, I understand this stuff's going to be kind of annoying to some people. It's like, it's still Hydreigon, still Lucky Ice Pop, but it's just so good. And I said it before, there's just not a lot of things in the game that are just going to hard beat Hydreigon. It's just a really tough thing to kind of deal with. But yeah, I mean, very standard list. And I think Hydreigon has been so strong ever since Lucky Ice Pop came out, mostly because you don't have the downsides of playing Indeedee for the healing. You don't have to worry about having that Pokemon on your bench. So you can just play Lucky Ice Pop, which sometimes just heals you more than Indeedee ever would, and it's not worth 2 prize cards. And then, of course, Poison Barb Nihilego, which is going to be really good against those sleep decks. Like, inherently, Poison Barb Nihilego is going to hit for, I think, 30 damage? So it's just going to kind of perfectly KO some baby Pokemon if they attack you, right? And this stuff here kind of arose because of the Chingling counter meta that was really prominent for Hydreigon, which is why you don't even see the middle evolution. Like, you just play Poison Barb Nihilego, and then Chingling's just going to KO itself, and it's going to kind of work itself out. Hydreigon has so many answers, such a strong deck list right now. And again, I think we probably do need to, understand. We'll take a look at the data and see maybe where Hydreigon struggles, and maybe we'll kind of lean in that direction. But I mean, for now, Imp Brendan. Also, shout out to Brendan. I think one of the more prominent players in Pokemon Pocket. He's very active, plays in a ton of tournaments, always places high. And I remember him playing Hydreigon commonly. So again, shout out to him. And this might not be his first time winning. I forget. We've had so many tournaments, I kind of forget. But definitely one of the top players. Let's take a look at Mame's deck. Again, nothing too surprising here, I would imagine. It is just the Igglybuff Darkrai Altaria deck, which is a very strong deck. It's just that, the metagame really kind of countered the sleep stuff pretty hard. And I don't think, with Poison Barb, Nihilego, Hydreigon, that Igglybuff is fundamentally that strong. So, a deck that lost in Grand Finals to Hydreigon probably could have won pretty easily, but this is not something that I would have recommended that highly going into this weekend. And I know it made Grand Finals, but I think we put it like A tier. I just don't think it's like, we'll take a look at the win rate at the end. I doubt this archetype did incredibly well throughout this weekend, but I like the one copy of Leaf in here, because if you lead Darkrai, it's not great. And everything else here is pretty standard. It's just Altaria. A strong deck. But, maybe the sleep stuff isn't as good as just Chingling item lock. It really comes down to, what's valuable and what matchups you're hitting. And I think with Hydreigon running around, we might just have to go back to the Chingling stuff. Maybe some Comfey Chingling lock. The game's over. If you get the Comfey down and you get the energy and you just start attacking with Chingling, Hydreigon can't do anything. It might be just a way that we need to go with Altaria. So we'll see. I'm just a big Chingling believer, quite honestly. And I think it's probably a better choice right now, but we'll see. The PCL in here, because every deck's playing PCL, Cape, Training Arena, Copycat, Lycia, Sabrina Cyrus. It's a good deck. I love this deck. It's just, I don't know if I would choose to play it right now, but he made Grand Finals. Let's take a look at his matchups though. And what he hit. I guess he actually did pretty decent into Hydreigon. He beat Nabrix and Gosu before losing to Brendan. So, maybe he has a pretty good run into Hydreigon. I guess Hydreigon does have to draw, the cards it needs to. The only other loss was to Mega Scizor, but beat a variety of basically everything relevant in the metagame. Magnezone, Manectric, Hydreigon, Suicune, Altaria, Greninja, Scizor, Giratina, Darkrai, Charizard, Altaria, the mirror matchup. This player beat basically every top deck on his way to Grand Finals, which, when you're playing the sleep deck, it really is kind of an RNG deck with the coin flips and sleep. So, it's possible. Nothing else to really say there, honestly. And then we have Kana's deck here from Japan, third place, Giratina Darkrai. Probably very similar to the deck that we took a look at on Friday that we've been recommending. And yeah, I think it's pretty much the same. Double Cape instead of maybe double Rocky Helmet. I think some people were running in the past, but the big upside always to Giratina Darkrai is that it's a low Pokemon count. Very, very standard deck, but a super consistent deck. It's not like the fastest thing in the world, not maybe the strongest Pokemon in the game. Any of these Pokemon are, but it's just always going to do what it wants to do. And against a Medic right now that is fairly slow, if most decks are kind of waiting 3 turns to get up and running, Giratina Darkrai is going to be kind of up and going on turn 3 anyway. So it's going to be, it's going to be viable. I think it's a really good choice right now. We have Copycat. One research. A lot of people have commented, the one research is surprising people, but in all seriousness, Copycat is a better card than research. I need people to know that, especially in a deck like this, where most of the cards that you're playing are either supporter cards or just cards that you would play when they come into your hand. Right? The tool cards you're attaching, the stadiums you're putting down, you're putting the Pokemon down, you're playing Pokeball. So Copycat in this deck list is just a bit more useful than research, I would say. Because you oftentimes have a small hand size. And yeah, I think it's a trend. I really think that a lot of decks just benefit from Copycat more than research. So, you're going to see some decks playing only one research, double Copycat. And, I think fundamentally it's actually better than if you were to play the opposite, play double research and one Copycat. But yeah, Giratina Darkrai, man, it's really good. It's a really good deck. It's funny because these are all things that we talked about on Friday. So, I definitely feel like I'm reiterating a little bit, but there's not a lot of huge surprises. I think a lot of these decks are pretty well defined. Yeah, normalized in terms of how we build them. This is Hydra's deck, and this is Altaria and Greninja, which might be the answer. Fundamentally, we'll take a look at the win rates, but it is playing Altaria Chingling. And I know Greninja does make this deck a bit inconsistent inherently, and it's going to have its struggles, but the only really things that this deck ever struggled against were Oricorio decks and then other Altaria decks playing Chingling, or other decks playing Chingling in a way to kind of win the Chingling battle so you couldn't get your Greninja out. If there's not a lot of Dark Greninja, if there's not a lot of traditional Altaria and not too much Oricorio, if all of those things get kind of pushed out because of the Hydreigon dominance, then you know, this is going to be probably like maybe our best option into Hydreigon. So I don't think that's really a big surprise. You know, and this deck list is super standard, so nothing else to really say about it. But if you take a look at the standings, you know, lots of Hydreigon, but there were multiple Altaria Greninjas high up here. What happened to Hydra here? So he did lose to Brandon. He did, and that was his only Hydreigon. No, he did play Toro Mike here in top 32 and got the win. At the end here, I'm definitely curious. We'll take a look at Hydreigon's win rates, but traditionally, I think Altaria Greninja does well into that matchup, so we'll have to see. Let's skip down here to Fredrecker from nowhere, I guess. 7th place. Let's take a look at his Suicune deck, which again, a very standardized deck. Like, there's definitely a lot of new things that have been relevant. You know, the sleep stuff was a big deal. Manectric's definitely pretty good. Scissor's good, but you know, inherently, like a lot of the strongest decks that are still in the metagame are decks that have existed from previous seasons. So I don't know. And Charizard's a big one. It's just one of those things where a lot of the new decks are really good. A lot of the new Pokemon are really good, but are they good into specifically the decks that, you know, are legacy in the metagame at this point? You know, because it really is Hydreigon, Suicune, Altaria. Like, that is still like the core fundamental, you know, like metagame for Pokemon Pocket. And I think it will be moving forward. You know, Suicune here, probably less relevant maybe than it was last season for sure. Yeah, I mean, it's still good, man. Still good. Really curious. We should have enough data to break down the win rates. Tomorrow, I might do a tier list, like an updated tier list, but what I might do is break down the win rates, because I think that we have enough data right now with all of these decks to really understand which decks are strong into other decks. Is that something you guys would be interested in? Or would you rather just get the updated tier list? We'll see. Mono Outlaw here. From Germany, Dark Greninja. This is kind of my favorite deck right now, and they are playing Chingling. So no sleep stuff. I know that a lot of Dark Greninja decks were playing the Darkrai Igglybuff package, but I genuinely do believe that Chingling is just sort of the better option right now. No poison protection, which is, you know, going to be a little bit tough here. Maybe a PCL could have been nice for the Chingling, but you know, inflatable boat to retreat the Froakie. Rocky Helmet on the Chingling's always nice. Darkrai plus Chingling. You're going to win the Chingling battles, but also, you know, if you go first, you are going to be able to KO an Igglybuff with you know, Rocky Helmet in the Chingling hit. So I think that Chingling's just really good, and I think that you can play decks in a certain way. It's interesting that the top Chingling decks, at least this tournament, were all playing Greninja, but you know, these are broken cards. That's the thing, is, you know, Chingling Greninja is going to be really, really good. Yeah, a deck, honestly, that I've been kind of recommending for quite some time now. I actually like the sleep version of this deck more than the Altaria version of sleep version of Altaria. But whether it's the Chingling version of either of these archetypes, I think they're both really good. So shout out to Chingling, deserves to see more play. You know, a deck, again, if you were to show me this deck 2 months ago, 3 months ago, I would be like, yeah, like that's what people are playing. So it's funny, you know, it's funny how just, you know, old archetypes are just still really good. You know, that's kind of the metagame. We're going to skip all the way down now to Takahiro's Steelix deck. Again, another thing that's probably figured out. I don't think there's anything too surprising here. We do see the PCL and Heavy Helmet. Some people asked me, like, why not play Steel Apron instead of Heavy Helmet? It's only minus 10 damage instead of minus 20, but you're immune to the statuses. It could be relevant. It could be relevant because not only do we have the sleep stuff, but we also have Hydreigon. I think for the most part, you probably want Heavy Helmet just because Onyx can't utilize Steel Apron because it's not a Steel type Pokemon. So I think Heavy Helmet's still a bit better. One PCL, double Indeedee. We got the Lucky Ice Pops. You know, still going to be a very annoying deck list, but let's take a look at his matchups here. Again, another player here that just lost to Hydreigon. Actually did really well. Beat 4 Hydreigon in a row in day 1, and then ended up losing here in 8th round of day 1, and then beat a couple Suicune decks, which you love to see, but then lost here in top 16 to a Hydreigon. So I think it really comes down, and this is just the thing that happens in tournaments, is that Hydreigon can always beat you. It doesn't really matter what you're playing. You will sometimes just lose to Hydreigon because, like, there's just unwinnable board states when you're playing against that deck. It just has the potential to be just too good sometimes, and not always. Like, Hydreigon has its issues. It's just when you're playing a tournament and you're going to have to go up against 4 or 5 Hydreigon throughout a tournament, like, odds are you're going to lose a couple of those games. So, you know, and inherently that's just what happens. And if there's enough Hydreigon, it just ends up winning because that's how high roll is. Like, that's the RNG high roll of Hydreigon. It's just sometimes it's unbeatable. And if enough people play it, it's going to get lucky. Impros in here, 15th place, double Charizard. So Charizard's sneaking its way into top 16 here. I do think Charizard inherently struggles with Hydreigon, just like all Mega Pokemon do. And if Entei can get a KO early on a Dino or something, then that's going to be beneficial. But you know, Charizard typically likes to kind of farm up these other Mega decks and just take KOs on 3 prize Pokemon and win games that way. when there's a lot of Suicune, when there's a lot of Hydreigon, you know, Charizard probably isn't that well positioned. Another deck also that's traditionally struggled into the lightning type deck. So again, you know, there's just different sections of the metagame, and depending on which is popular, you know, is going to depend on which decks are viable. And I just don't really love Charizard into this kind of new season, or at least what the metagame's progressing into, but you know, definitely fundamentally one of the strongest decks in the game. And then here, Lenora, 16th place here is Manectric and Zeraora. So this is the deck of last week that was so popular. It was absolutely everywhere. But, you know, if a deck becomes popular, people are going to play decks that are strong into it. And I think the meta right now is not nearly as kind to the Manectric, Zeraora, or Choreo stuff as it was previously. And again, I think Hydreigon's probably the biggest reason for that, you know. That's where it's Hydreigon's world, and we're just living in it. You know, this is a deck that has a ton going for it. I really love, you know, the pacing and the speed of this deck list with Mega Manectric, but you know, going through double Hydreigon, probably not the easiest thing in the world. However, you know, Manectric can technically KO a Dino before it evolves, but you only have 180 HP, and you're going to have to take 3 KOs into Hydreigon. You're going to have to get kind of lucky, or Coreo's not really going to help you too much in that matchup. So, yeah, I mean, it's a good deck, definitely strong. It's just, again, a lot of these decks that were popular early in the season just maybe aren't even that good into some of the stuff that people are just trying to play now. And that's the meta progression, man. That's just how it goes. You know, you guys can be upset about it, but there's so many strong decks. Every deck is going to have its time in the spotlight throughout a season. You know, if this season were to go 3 months long without any new cards, like you would see the rise of Hydreigon, the fall of Hydreigon, the rise of Altaria, the fall of Altaria, or Core, like all of it. You would just see, you know, all of these decks kind of coming in waves. And I don't think anyone should be surprised that right now Hydreigon is kind of on the uptick, you know, because eventually by the end of the season, it just won't be that well positioned, and we have to counterbalance the metagame and adjust to it. So that's the reality. That's kind of all the decks we're going to take a look at. That's all the different decks in top 16. But what I want to do now is definitely go into this metagame tab, because this information is going to be very, very helpful whenever things really kind of become pretty concrete in terms of how things are kind of progressing in the metagame. Then I like to really break down the metagame data and know what those next steps are going to be to kind of progress the metagame. So let's dive into it. If you made it this far in the video, shout out to you. I appreciate it. Don't forget to like and subscribe and register for PMPT number 27. Let's get into it. So, Suicune actually the #1 most played deck by a very slight margin, and nothing super dominant, but trust me, like this is going to change. So tournaments right now throughout this week, and maybe even into next weekend, you know, we're going to see Hydreigon incredibly popular. Not only did it get first place and had a bunch of placements in top 16, but it had a 53% win rate. So that's that's the highest amongst really most of these most played decks. So a very dominant performance. Suicune Excalibur did do well though. 12% of the meta, 52% win rate. 225 to 209. So very respectable. Seems like Suicune's just a good deck. You know, who would have thought? Yeah, Hydreigon here, definitely kind of the big standout. And again, if we take a look at these, like look at all of these players here. Just a ton of really great records for Hydreigon. No really surprise, but we got to do our due diligence here. Let's take a look at the matchup spreads for Hydreigon. And okay, yeah, I totally forgot, but Suicune, the new Suicune does actually beat Hydreigon. I kind of forgot about that in a weird way, but so does Altaria and Greninja. So we have the tools available to us. It's funny that Suicune being the most played deck this weekend and Hydreigon ended up winning, but Suicune and Excalibur does beat Hydreigon. So that's very important. We need to kind of keep that in our minds here. Very dominant matchup spread here. So Hydreigon only went 19 and 36. That's a 34% win rate into Suicune, and that's a really big deal. But it's good into Steelix, really good into Manectric. It's good into Venusaur. Pretty 50-50 actually into Sleep Altaria and Giratina Darkrai. So maybe these decks do kind of survive the test of time throughout the season. But Hydreigon does struggle into Altaria, Greninja, and then basically everything else that anybody plays, it is going to lose to Hydreigon. So that's, you know, kind of the core issue with this deck, is that it just beats basically anything else that's not like the couple of decks that lose to it. So it's good. It's nice, actually. I forgot that Suicune Excalibur is sort of a counter meta deck to Hydreigon. So that makes me feel totally fine. Definitely an early rock, paper, scissors formation. Or I say early, but probably just like, you know, just like we probably had in previous seasons. Because if we go to Suicune Excalibur and take a look at its matchups, we're going to see here that it struggles into Steelix and Manectric. Okay, so that's the clear. Charizard also loses, unfortunately, to Suicune. So Charizard's probably not going to be doing that well. Same with, we're actually losing to Scizor. So, definitely Suicune and Hydreigon are going to be, you know, at the top of this metagame. They sort of counterbalance each other, but what can we play that's going to be strong in this week? And it does feel like the Steel type decks are up there and the Lightning type decks are up there. So even though Steelix, Manectric, and Scizor probably lose to Hydreigon, at least they beat Suicune, and Suicune beats Hydreigon. So, really any of those decks you're going to find yourself in sort of probably in the counter meta territory, which we can really expect any of those decks to kind of pop off and be very successful going into next weekend, where we're probably going to see a very large variety of those top two decks being Suicune and Hydreigon, right? Because they are. Those are just the best decks in the game. At least Suicune, these are the balance in Pokemon Pocket is so surprising to me. You would think that there would be, like with all these strong decks, like a real clear option, but there never is. There's really never a clear option. It's actually kind of crazy if you think about it. Look at all these decks that beat Suicune. Like Steelix kind of absolutely bodies it. Manectric does very well into it. Even Scizor does well into it. Venusaur, typically always a good counter to Suicune as well. Sleep Altaria ends up beating Suicune. Giratina Darkrai is beating Suicune. This deck list is kind of losing to a lot. Like Suicune's struggling into basically everything other than Hydreigon, which is so funny. So yeah, that's okay. So the way that I'm going to kind of predict the progression of this metagame is that the meta driver moving forward, the number one most played deck will likely be Hydreigon. And so I think Suicune's going to find itself as like kind of the number one just counter meta deck. I know it sounds weird to call Suicune counter meta, but that's what it is. It's losing to a lot of decks, but beating probably the number one deck, which is Hydreigon. And then everything else here below that you might consider relevant, like Steelix, Manectric, Venusaur, Scizor, Giratina Darkrai, Altaria, Greninja. These are really good decks, but more counter meta decks, right? These are decks that are beating, decks that are beating the meta. It's a weird thing, but Hydreigon definitely probably going to be sitting at the top here. But, look at Giratina Darkrai went 67-56, very respectable. Scizor and Reverum did well. 74 and 67. Like that's a very, very respectable performance from the Scizor players. I told you that's a strong deck. And then Altaria Greninja, I did want to take a look at these matchups because this deck list is always something. Hard losing to Oricorio and Lightning, and 1 and 3 against Sleep. These are small numbers here, and losing to Charizard. So that's the thing about Altaria, and probably why we won't see Altaria fundamentally dominate throughout the rest of the season. I could be wrong, but it's hard to believe that with like a lot of the new Lightning type decks and of course Charizard being so strong into Altaria, I just don't really ever see it being as dominant of a force in the metagame as it used to be. And I think that it used to be like the quintessential like other deck, right? You had Hydreigon, Suicune, and Altaria. But at this point, I just don't really think it's strong enough. And I think that that third place is really split amongst a lot of different decks. And Altaria is one of them, but there's really like 5 or 6 decks that fall into that category. So I think that's interesting. But yeah, good into, because of the Chingling Altaria. So we're good into Hydreigon, decent into Suicune, 8 and 7 so far. Good into Steelix, which is really crazy. I guess Steelix doesn't really play Protective Poncho. Not that it would matter really, but you can't really protect the Indeedis from Greninja, right? Really, really poor into Manectric, really good into Venusaur. So, man, the matchup spreads are really everywhere. I know it's kind of crazy when you take a look at these standings. You really kind of feel like the meta is dominating right now, or being dominated by Hydreigon, but there's so many strong options. I think that, all we really have to do is understand, these Hydreigon matchups and play accordingly. Like, that's kind of like we have so many options. That's what's absolutely ridiculous about Pokemon Pocket right now is how many strong decks there are. So yeah, I think moving forward, Suicune's going to be really strong. And I think, I think, Altaria Greninja is going to be really strong. And yeah, that's kind of, is that it really? I guess that is it. That's the only things you got to worry about if you're playing Hydreigon, which is crazy. Hydreigon definitely, like by a country mile, like just the best deck in the game. There's really only a couple of options. But at least we have options, right? At least we can play things that beat Hydreigon. So I think Suicune, listen, if I'm playing in PMPT number 27, like I'm riding the Suicune train, or I'm getting a little bit spicy, right? And I might be playing some Altaria stuff, but Altaria seems a little bit more suspect as opposed to Suicune. So, we'll see. What do you guys think? What do you guys think of the results this weekend? I don't think we're panic button yet. To be honest, I think some people maybe don't really understand this or believe this, but out of the 26 tournaments that we've ran, Hydreigon has won 3 of them. Now, I think Hydreigon has made Grand Finals an absurd amount of time, but its record in Grand Finals is actually quite poor. It oftentimes loses in Grand Finals. So after 26 tournaments, this is only the 3rd time Hydreigon has won a tournament. But as we see, it's kind of dominating across the board. So a great week for Hydreigon. We kind of talked about that last week, that it was kind of coming up and going to disrupt the meta, as it typically does, your boy Hydreigon here, just really aggressive. I mean, this thing is scary. Hopefully when B3 comes out, what we need is like, I say what we need are more Hydreigon counters, but I don't know if we really do. I think we just need something maybe to kind of, I don't know. It's hard to say. I really like the metagame. As long as they just keep releasing new cards that are viable, like I think it'll all kind of work itself out in the end, honestly. But that's it. That's the video. That's Meta Monday, guys. Stay tuned. We're either going to do a matchup spread video tomorrow, even though we just did it today, or we'll do an updated tier list. People might be more interested in that, so probably do maybe that tomorrow. And then, yeah, you know, we'll cover everything throughout this week. I think Pokemon Champions comes out in 2 days. So we're going to have some more content coming out on the Champions channel. I should still be posting videos on the Pocket Mads channel, but I definitely want to do some content for Pokemon Champions. So stay tuned for all of that. Don't forget to like and subscribe, almost at 50,000 subscribers. And you got to register for PMPT number 27. This is going to be your last chance to qualify for the Invitational Tournament a week after this. So I guess it'll be April 18th. Is when we'll do the Invitational, and then, you know, by then, again, we're probably going to get some announcement about B3 when that's announcing, so hopefully that's going to be a lot of fun. But there it is, guys. Let's wrap it up. Peace out. Have a good one. We'll see you guys later. And yeah. Bye.